This is my father, Colonel Fitzroy Newsum, United States Air Force. My name's Danny Newsum, and I'm going to tell you some of my memories.
You know, you grow up, the Tuskegee Airmen now in 2012, there's probably not as wide an understanding of their stories as there should be, but there certainly is than there was 10, 20, or 30 years ago. And growing up, I mean, I was just one of the Newsum kids. And my dad was in the Air Force and my mom was a teacher. I didn't really understand what my dad had been through. And I'll never understand. I didn't really pay attention to what my dad had been through. And my dad didn't talk about, not to me, about what he had been through.
I can't tell you that much about his experience over there. When he explains it, and he does it so well, but it's not something that he shared, with the family, so to speak. But yet, when you're out places or amongst others who've been through the same thing, you hear so much and you find out so much about what they went through. But it's not as if he sat down and I want to tell you what this was or that was. No, he wasn't that, he didn't communicate like that about him, which I think were very important things to him.
But it was after I got older, after I was in college, where I started placing my dad in a larger historical context. It's like, oh, he's a Tuskegee Airman. That's a word I, grew up with, but it really started meaning something. And then I started seeing my dad, frankly, through other people's eyes when they would hear, your dad is a Tuskegee Airman, at least those people in the know, and, the look of wonder or like amazement. And it's like, yeah, my dad is a Tuskegee Airman.
They had no place for blacks to train blacks in the Air Force. And he was rejected on application for it. And those were the words, give or take a little, those were the wordings that they received back, that we have no place to train Negroes, they said at the time.
And again, my dad didn't share a lot of those stories. There are some, and my dad, I can still see him saying this story, and this, I believe, was in France. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it was in France. And a commanding officer, or if not a commanding officer, a officer who had rank over my dad at the time, used the N-word. And I just remember trying to get past thinking, oh my God, how would that be if that had happened to me? I would have been drummed out of the military. But it's like, oh my God. How do you deal with that? How do you process that and move on? And save your career? I can't imagine.
While he was in Hawaii, he received orders that he had never heard of Tuskegee, actually, because between the West Indies and New York, he didn't hear of Tuskegee, Alabama, any place, but that he was to report to Tuskegee, Alabama. And for pilot training, they were now opening it up for training Negro pilots, and he had been selected to go. He didn't attend it as a cadet, he attended it as a first lieutenant, which is different when you're training down there because you're not training with the cadets, and you go in as a first lieutenant. So I never thought of the separation until a few times he'd mention it, and he'd say, well, no, I didn't know so-and-so, or I didn't do so-and-so. He knew more. We were kind of separated a little bit.
But there's something that really stands out to me. I've only seen my father cry twice. And at his retirement ceremony in 1970, he was teary-eyed when he left the Air Force. He was teary. And then the second time was here in this house. It was downstairs in our family room. And we were all watching, the name of the movie, I think it's A Soldier's Story, about a group of black men, officers and non-commissioned officers on a base, and I think it was in the South. And a black non-commissioned officer, I think, was murdered. Anyway, there was an investigation, there was a trial. That kind of remains sketchy, but what I remember as if it was yesterday was my dad. And his face was just a wall of emotion that I've never really seen. And he was crying. My father was crying watching that movie. That told me so much. I don't have the facts, but it told me so much about the pressure my father and all those other men who were stationed at Tuskegee and at various bases throughout their military careers, and the pressure they were under as men who wanted to do a good job, and as African American men who had the cards stacked against them and knew it, and they still wanted to persevere. And all these years later, not only did my dad learn to fly and make a career out of flying, the country is coming around slowly to realizing what he and other of the men in the Tuskegee Airmen went through. My dad was born in the United States, the first generation of his family who was to be born in the United States, the first person in his family to be born in the United States. He was born in New York, but he was raised in Barbados. That's where his family is from. And he always would tell this story. You know, when he was a little one in Barbados and looking up and seeing airplanes fly over him, he really wanted to fly. That's what he wanted to do.